Staring is considered rude in just about every culture in the world, but workplace bullies stare at targets both inside and outside of the workplace. In normal, everyday conversation, it's considered polite to make eye contact, but impolite to stare. So you make what's called modified eye contact by looking away and looking at other things periodically, and of course, blinking. Staring in the workplace most often occurs when the target is seated or sometimes standing engaged in some solitary activity or even in conversation with other coworkers and even clients. The workplace bully slithers past or approaches the target directly with a preliminary, long, slow, prolonged, lingering gaze that feels predatory in nature. Alternatively, workplace bullies stare at whatever you're working on, whatever work is in front of you, and workplace bullies especially love to stare at computer screens and especially your food. Workplace bullies are obsessed with food. The workplace bully enters your workspace and instead of making any eye contact with you at all, proceeds to stand and stare at your computer screen or at your food. Their voice drops and they appear to be in some kind of hypnotic trance, literally hypnotized by whatever is on your screen or by your food. And this is what passes for conversation in the workplace. We all know there are relatively benign reasons people stare in society in general. Number one, they could be daydreaming and already in a hypnotic state. They don't realize they're doing it, and they're not even really looking at you, but are lost in thought instead. Number two, you could be physically attractive, or number three, weird. They feel that you are doing or especially wearing something out of the ordinary. And finally, people often stare because they're trying to make eye contact because they want to initiate conversation with you for whatever reason. But I argue that in the workplace, staring is a form of bullying because it is always hostile and always has malicious intent. Staring in the workplace is a form of sexual harassment. The worst starers in the workplace, both men and women, are the worst sexual harassers. Though some people may disagree with me, I argue that workplace bullying is narcissistic abuse because the parallels between narcissistic abuse and workplace bullying are uncanny. So all workplace bullies are narcissists, or at the very least display very narcissistic tendencies. The first phase of narcissistic abuse is called love bombing, and staring is the narcissistic workplace bully's version of love bombing. They think that they are giving you a sultry, seductive, come hither gaze. It's a sexual provocation. It's also a form of projection. The workplace bully is trying to evoke in you the same feelings of sexual arousal that he feels in your presence, but it is appallingly ineffective and has the result of only completely repulsing the target. The worst sexual harassers, the Pigsteins of the world, are simultaneously the most unattractive people on the planet. They are disgusting, not only physically, but also, above all, morally and spiritually. If you are not a narcissist and not a bully, you know by now that if you want to attract someone, the more aggressive you are, the more you simply alienate that person. But narcissistic workplace bullies with absolutely no game have to resort to very base, carnal, primitive, sexually aggressive behaviors because they are incapable of attracting people naturally. The number one reason workplace bullies stare is their complete and total lack of empathy. Narcissism is defined by many things, but one of those things is a lack of empathy. Narcissistic workplace bullies need to stare at you because that's the only way they can ever have any hope of ever understanding you. They are studying you, reading you, and trying to determine what you are thinking and feeling. You would think that if they wanted to get to know you, they would simply show up and engage in civil, polite conversation between mature adults in a spirit of perfect equality and peace that does not violate your boundaries. But because narcissistic workplace bullies are so abhorrent on every level, you don't really want to engage with them, so they just stare at your face instead. I have a theory that most targets of workplace bullying are empaths, or at the very least, highly sensitive people. If you are intuitive, you don't need to stare at people because you can read their energy. In fact, you read energy so well, you can read it remotely, over the phone, or before the person even walks in the room. Sometimes it's better not to look at the person, so the physical body does not get in the way of the energy that you are reading. Workplace bullies are completely lacking in any kind of spiritual awareness, knowledge, or wisdom, and are completely unconscious. So they operate exclusively on a base, primitive, low-level 3D material and physical reality, and don't understand energy or intent. I use the term predatorial because that's exactly what staring in the workplace is. Many people who've been involved with narcissists, romantically or otherwise, have used the term reptilian, particularly in regards to the narcissistic stare, which is a characteristic of narcissism. Workplace bullies are not interested in getting to know you because they would like to enter into a healthy, mature adult relationship of mutual love, respect, equality, and peace, because they can't. The one thing that narcissists will never be able to do in their lives is experience real relationships with other human beings on a heart, soul, and spiritual level. Staring in the workplace is the workplace bullies' version of opposition research. They're data mining, trying to get your number, and scanning you for potential vulnerabilities, insecurities, and weaknesses to exploit, take advantage of, manipulate, and use against you. Workplace bullies, like all bullies, are fundamentally weak, lazy, and stupid cowards at heart who don't like a challenge or even hard work. So they're not going to hit you on your strengths. They hit you instead on your insecurities because you're doing half their work for them, and they speak the language of insecurities. If you are not a narcissist and not a bully, you can have relationships with other people in which you relate to and celebrate your strengths. Workplace bullies understand only insecurities and commiserate with other people in a never-ending cycle of domination, subordination, power, and control. They are allergic to equality. The reason staring is considered rude in almost every culture in the world is that it hurts people. It makes people feel uncomfortable. Staring in the workplace is not innocent because the intent is wholly malicious. It's a power trip and a control move in a very deliberate attempt to assert dominance, power, control, and manipulation over a target by making the target feel uncomfortable in order to force submission and compliance. It's like a childhood staring contest, which is the appropriate level. Anyone who's ever dealt with a narcissist has complained that they feel as though they're dealing with a 3-year-old child. That's because they are. Because of severe early childhood trauma, narcissists operate exclusively out of the reptilian child brain of pure survival, without any logic, rationality, or reason. As narcissists, workplace bullies do not tolerate anything or anyone in their environment that they do not control. Again, they are allergic to equality and therefore demand subordination and dependence. Just as they are allergic to equality, workplace bullies are also allergic to peace. It's interesting that just like the workplace bullying technique of harassment, staring so often occurs when the target is seated quietly alone in solitude, engaged in some solitary activity. Workplace bullies are master disturbers of the peace. It's like throwing a pebble into the water just to see what happens. Another characteristic of narcissism is pathological jealousy. Workplace bullies have to throw you off your game because you are capable of doing another thing that narcissists will never be able to do in their lives, and that is simply to be at peace with themselves. If workplace bullies know that staring makes you feel uncomfortable and they continue to do it anyway because they enjoy hurting you, then their narcissism has progressed into full-blown straight-up cluster B psychopathy and sociopathy. One of the reasons workplace bullies have devolved the entire workplace into absolutely nothing more than a petty, childish high school popularity contest is that all workplace bullies are profoundly unlikable people. When they come around, everybody sort of collectively internally groans and goes, oh shit, so-and-so is here. It's not true that narcissists love themselves. They neither love nor hate themselves because they don't have selves. A narcissist is at the core a dead and empty soul with no real internal life or self. And that real self has been substituted by the false self, otherwise known as the narcissistic ego, which is a flimsy, fragile house of cards that demands constant validation and support, otherwise known as supply, which in the absence of spirituality, narcissists can only source from other people. Getting supply from other people is the only way narcissists know they exist or have significance. If you are not a narcissist, by now you know that you have significance because you are a child of God, created in the image of the Creator, who loves you unconditionally. Narcissists have significance only when they are hurting other people. Just as staring in the workplace is a projection of workplace bullies' sexual desire, it's also a projection of their own fear. If you watch workplace bullies when they stare at you, they often lift their chins and squint in a very guarded and defensive facial expression that is a classic example of fear-based body language. Workplace bullies stare at you because they have identified you as a threat. All workplace bullying is an attempt to eliminate a target that has posed a threat to the narcissistic ego by not enabling that ego and not providing narcissistic supply. Your failure to provide narcissistic supply is called narcissistic injury. And staring is the workplace bully's way of punishing you. Maybe you pointed out something that he did wrong. Workplace bullies feel entitled to punish you for not providing narcissistic supply because narcissists cannot live without supply any more than you can live without air to breathe. Sometimes their fear is very specific. Melanie Tanya Evans says, the one weakness all narcissists have in common is a lack of integrity. If they're not above bullying you, then what else are they up to? In my decades of being bullied in the workplace, I've witnessed plenty of other unethical and even illegal behaviors. Often workplace bullies are staring at you when they are up to no good and are afraid of being found out for stealing office supplies, for example. If you are a target of workplace bullying, you may very well be an empath or at the very least highly intuitive, and though you don't let on what you know, they know you know. Staring in the workplace also so often occurs almost immediately after narcissistic workplace bullies have tried to achieve significance by hurting you. Maybe you received some completely unwarranted verbal or written warning or some other reprimand. Maybe you were unfortunately affected by a schedule change or some other change in the work. Or maybe you have finally been eliminated. I argue that bullying is an addiction. Bullies are addicted to bullying, and they're also addicted to the target because narcissists cannot go without supply any more than you can go without air to breathe, which explains another workplace bullying technique, the technique of stalking, in which workplace bullies show up in the target's experience even after the target has been separated from work. And here is where it gets scary. These people are sick. They drive past your place of residence and they appear in parks, gyms, theaters, and places that you go in order to stare at you there. It's like the proverbial ex who dumps you and is later driving past your house to check you out. They stare at your face because they need to know that what they have done to you has gotten to you and they have hurt you. Workplace bullies really, 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 really need to see you cry. In the narcissistic stare of the workplace bully, you can detect plenty of fear and you can also detect pure hatred. Workplace bullies are completely lacking in any sort of spiritual awareness, knowledge, or wisdom. They're completely lacking in empathy and completely incapable of connecting with other human beings through the heart, soul, or spirit. And they don't understand energy. So they do view you as absolutely nothing more than a physical object. Staring is a form of the workplace bullying technique of objectification, which is a form of the workplace bullying technique of physical violence. Workplace bullies may be spiritually unconscious, but they are not stupid. They almost never do or say anything that can get them into trouble, get them fired, or worse, get them arrested. The whole point of workplace bullying is that it needs to be as indirect, subtle, and passive-aggressive as possible so the bullies can never be called on their behavior, and it can never get back to them. So workplace bullies may never actually get physically violent with you, but they sure as hell want to. These are people with fantasies of rape and murder. When the narcissistic workplace bully is staring at you, he is thinking about all of the horrible things that he wants to do to you. So that's an introduction to the workplace bullying technique of staring. To read more in detail, I've written an essay on workplace bullying. It's on my website, and I include that information in the description. The reason that I create this video series is to establish a forum where targets of workplace bullying can share their experiences and stories in a kind of support group. So you can know, number one, you're not crazy. Workplace bullying is real, and your feelings are completely valid and justified. And number two, you're not alone. Unfortunately, there are countless others who have experienced the same thing. So I look forward to reading your comments, and I promise to try to respond to each one. Take care.